Hey, this is Ritchie coming at you from the School of Marketing HQ. Before you dive into the show, I just want to tell you about a brand new short 12-week program we've launched called the Giants Marketing Masterclass. The program gives you access to insights and expert comments from over 25 CEOs and CMOs from major companies like Unilever, L'Oreal, M&S, Pret, and WPP, just to name a few. We focus on 6 key areas of marketing: customer, brand, commercial, creative, channel, and data and analytics. So if you were looking to upskill yourself or your team for just 2.5 hours each week and get access to a network with our industry's giants through our live sessions, do check out the School of Marketing website for more deets. Alrighty, for now, enjoy the show. Well, hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Places We'll Go show with your hosts, Ritchie and Mark. Now today, we really do have one of the greatest marketing management thinkers of our time on the show, Professor Philip Kotler, who is the Emeritus Professor of Marketing at the Kellogg School of Management. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to finding out what I have to say.
Brilliant. Before we get into that, I'm just going to say a little bit more. Now, in all honesty, he is a man who truly needs no introduction, as he is widely acclaimed to be the father of modern marketing. It's without doubt that any marketer worth their salt would have used the many theories that he has developed in practice. And not to mention that if you've taken any marketing course around the world, it will be impossible to have not come across Professor Kotler. He is the very professor who popularized the notion of the marketing mix, or the 4 Ps, which of course forms the foundation in everything we do in marketing. He's also the author of over 80 books on the subject. Now, Professor Kotler's accolades are extensive, to say the least, just really too many to list them all. But as one example of the height of his achievements is that he has 22 honorary degrees. So it's with absolute great pleasure that I get once again welcome Professor Kotler to the show. Mark, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you.
And he's starting on mute.
Professor Kotler, amazing to have you on the show. Slightly intimidated and nervous, I have to say. I was actually very, very fortunate once upon a time to go to an honorary degree ceremony for Nelson Mandela. It was probably one of the most proud and interesting moments of my life. But he only had 8 honorary degrees. You've got 22. So I think this is a mark of the man. So such a thrill to have you on. Get us started by telling us, where are you in the world and how are you doing?
Well, why don't I say something about the honorary degree issue too, because it really has a background. Namely, the world needed a direction to recover, to go in, and they didn't know much about marketing except to experience it on a daily basis when they would shop. And I began to get letters and requests from various countries, from business firms and public institutions. What is this marketing about? And I fortunately like to travel. And I remember going to Italy, Milan, for 12 years, once a year, to bring Italy up to speed in understanding marketing. The same thing happened with Sweden, Stockholm. They would invite, it was called Kotler Day in Sweden, once a year, when I would bring the latest thinking on marketing. So the world was looking for some answers. And fortunately, at my university, Northwestern University, I was a member of a department that was unique in its creativity. You know, we all know of times like the Bloomsbury Circle in England, the time when an incredible number of people start thinking about something and making a mark as a group. And well, I was at that kind of a setting with Professor Sidney Levy and others, and we began to formulate a marketing viewpoint, that marketing is not just about goods and services, but it's about trying to affect other people in hopefully positive ways, whether you're a performer, whether you're a city that wants to be known better and do better good, whether you're an idea that needs circulation, that marketing is everywhere and everything. And bringing that message to different countries that were ready for something ended up with 22 degrees. I think it's not that you don't apply for an honorary degree. Though in one case, I think it was almost like that. But that explains that little thing about my degrees. But I've been evolving in my own thinking. In fact, I'll tell you a story that I gave a speech to some CEOs in the audience, and one of them came up to me after I finished and asked me to sign perhaps my book. He had a copy, and I looked at the copy. It was not the latest marketing book I wrote, because I was sort of in the 16th edition now. Right now, it's the 16th edition of Marketing Management. But it was the first book on marketing that I wrote in 1967. And I noticed in looking at it, it's marked up. He actually read it. There was underlining and so on. And I said, "Do you still use it?" He says, "Yes, something comes up in the company and I go to the right chapter and I see what you have to say about it." I said, "That's fine. So did you like my talk about branding?" He says, "Well, you didn't say that much about branding that I remember, but yes." But the truth is I had about 4 pages on branding in the whole 700-page book. "And did you like my talk about brand equity and so on?" He said, "I don't remember reading about that. Are you trying to tell me that I should buy a new book?" said the CEO. And I said, "Of course, you've got to, don't practice 1967 marketing in the year 2022. It's ridiculous. And it's not that I need the money from the book. It's that you're way out of date." So I signed it anyways. I mean, the whole point was to sign it with a message. So that's marketing. That not only did I want him to evolve, I'm evolving all the time. For example, on the marketing mix, the 4 Ps. A little story on how that came about. There was a professor at Northwestern University when I joined the faculty named Richard Cluett. And Cluett organized this course with 4 Ps, but he had actually 3 Ps. Product, price, place, promotion. He left, he called one of them distribution. It was product, promotion, price, and distribution. So he invented the 3 Ps in the 1 D, distribution. I met Jerry McCarthy later at a Ford Foundation meeting, and he says, I'm going to call that distribution place. It doesn't sound right to me to do that, but it is. Distribution is over space, right? And so he actually was the one who first created the language. Cluett created the language, really, but the word place replaced the word distribution. And I got excited about that. So Jerry continued in his textbook to do 4 Ps, but I built it into many more things. And now, frankly, another group came along that said, everything's about product, but what about services? Services are intangible. What are the Ps for services? Well, the Ps for services are still the 4 Ps, but let's add 3 more. One is that you need physical evidence in any service. You can claim that you took an airplane flight, but where's your ticket? So we need always, you may claim that you had a haircut, but where's the bill that shows that you paid for a haircut? So the point is, they added another P called physical evidence. They added another P for people, because when it's a service, you're usually, unless it's a vending machine, usually you're dealing with a barber or something like that. And then they added a third P for process. That just take McDonald's, you're going through a process. Is it well designed as a process? So that made it 7 Ps. Then people say, but what about sales? Sales begins with an S, but salesman. Well, that's under promotion. Okay. And before you know it, people are eager to expand it from 7 Ps to 10 Ps and so on. They don't understand that basically every company does marketing planning, hopefully, and has a process that they use, and they focus on hopefully 4 Ps or 7 Ps, or they have to define themselves what are the key winners in the preparation of their marketing mix. So remember, the original marketing mix came out of Harvard from a professor named Neil Borden. He had 14 Ps. Now, they weren't Ps at the time, 14 things that affect a purchase. Well, that's too much to remember. So we're down to something. I'm afraid we are going from just the simple theory of 4 to 7 to something else. And that's good too.
We certainly are, Professor. And I think in the industry, there is always a bit of a running rhetoric about how many Ps will we get to at the end of our careers. Who knows? Who knows? It's a mystery. But I mean, what a privilege to hear you recite some of those early day thinking. And actually, quite honestly, I can only imagine what a wonderfully stimulating environment it must have been at Northwestern with those colleagues as you were sort of formulating some of these fundamental principles and tenets of what marketing is. And many of them untouchable in terms of will always remain true no matter how the market moves. And yet, of course, at the other end of the spectrum, there are certain key principles, tactics that are constantly and ever evolving. And I would love to get your point of view as you talked about, the thought that you're constantly evolving your thinking. What are some of the things that you're thinking about today in the context of marketing?
Sure. One of the things that I think we have to look at is how we bring economics into marketing. Because is marketing really only an economic discipline, or is it a social science? And it's been treated pretty much, by the way, it's sort of ambiguous even in the minds of strict economists. They think of price 1 P only. The whole economic system is a matter of trying to explain why is the price what it is. And they don't do it scientifically. They don't ask companies how they set the price. They just assume that there is a price that makes sense in a competitive setting. And I started to remember my training was at 2 universities where I had a chance to examine the whole nature of economics. At the University of Chicago, I got my master's degree in economics from Professor Milton Friedman. And we called him Uncle Milty. And some of us took his course twice, even though we got an A in the course. We wanted to hear him again. And of course, he was a free market economist, and he felt that just get government out of the marketplace, and people out of self-interest will do the right things for themselves and for the society. So I was a free market economist by almost just feeling Milton Friedman's influence, but I went to MIT as a corrective. I wanted to see a little more about a guy named John Maynard Keynes and his followers. So at MIT, I had two other Nobel Prize winners. I had Paul Samuelson and then Robert Solow. In fact, my committee, when I came with my dissertation and ready to be graduating, I met with them in an office. This was being examined. I was being examined, and it was so I was with two Nobel Prize winners, Paul Samuelson and Robert Solow, and Myers, who was a committee member too, Professor Myers. And the first question I got was from Milton Friedman, and not Milton Friedman, sorry, from Paul Samuelson. And Paul Samuelson said, "Kotler, what do you think of the Marxian theory of value? Do you think it makes sense or not?" Now, it's funny because we rarely talked about Karl Marx, which was a big mistake because there was a whole economic theory there that should have been examined by any decent business school for its faults as well as its impact. And I scrambled an answer. Apparently, they passed me because they sent me out of the room. They asked a few other questions. They sent me out of the room. It was clear that in sending me out of the room after just 2 or 3 questions, they wanted to get it over. They had already made their mind that I'm getting a degree. Then they welcomed me back, and there was a big bottle of champagne, and they poured it, and I graduated. But the main thing is that I started to look back, and I realized I was not being taught a true theory of the world. That the idea that all decisions are made rationally by people who have full information is a joke. As a matter of fact, just going to a supermarket, you'll see any person probably bought 3 or 4 things they didn't plan on buying because the counter, just at checkout, there were candy bars they didn't intend to buy, but they bought it. That 70 to 80% of your buying is emotional, not rational. And so I began to search for the social sciences. I became a part-time sociologist, a part-time anthropologist, a part-time I went back to the University of Chicago for social science training. And I realized that we need a new theory. Now, I'll tell you who's doing a good job on that. There's a theory called the donut theory of marketing. And it's done by a woman. You just look up donut theory if you're interested. And she has a framework which is much more social scientific about how things are affected by the markets. And it's popularized by a center we have in the United States called the Schumacher Center. Now, Schumacher is a very big idea. He's the man who wrote a book called Small is Beautiful. Small is Beautiful. And they're always examining more social scientifically based theories of economic behavior and other behaviors. So I got into capitalism as a result, about the system. And I always felt that capitalism is the right system because I had Milton Friedman teach me that, but it has to be improved. That first of all, you go around the world, it is so different in Japan. Japanese capitalism has a lot of its own flavor, and Swedish capitalism and so on, different. And I said, the job is not to replace capitalism, it is to make it better. Has any country made it better? So I needed criteria. The criteria is capitalism is working best where I find that the population in that country is more educated, healthier, and happier. There's no better evidence of a successful social and economic system than that the people are better educated, happier, and healthier. And guess what I discovered? That place is called the Nordic countries, namely Sweden, Finland, Denmark, a little of Iceland, and so on. My God. Now, is that capitalism? Yes, but it's a different kind. It's a capitalism which says that the big decisions in life are taken on by the state, not by the private enterprise. That, for example, our health should be a public service, not a for-profit service. Our college should be available to everyone. It should be a public service. And suddenly I realized that I now know why the middle class is getting smaller in the United States and so stable in Europe, more stable. Yes. And the reason is that many European countries don't have to worry about getting into college and about a big health bill that will bankrupt you. So it came about recently in an article where someone abroad said, "You must be rich. You're getting $600,000 a year or $400,000. That's a lot of money, so you can't complain." And the answer was no. I am rich, but I am a member of the rich poor. What do you mean? There's a class of people called the rich poor. Yes, because 400,000, if you have 3 kids, do you think you're going to be able to get them into college? Do you think health bills can be covered of your kids and so on and so forth? So my thinking has moved very much toward a form of capitalism that takes care of the 3 big things that in our lives by higher taxes. On who? The average person? No, on the wealthy people who are always undertaxed. The wealthy people are undertaxed. And they do their best with their attorneys to pay no taxes. And then look at some of the companies. Did Apple pay anything as the most valuable country in the world, company in the world, in taxes? So basically, we have a rigged economy that is not. So right now, there's a big question. The U.S. has a deficit, and the Republicans are want to say that this will kill us, and we won't raise the debt limit. Hell, just pass a bill and get some more money from the rich, or start cutting down your defense expenditure, which is wasted. You know, all the money in defense is about building equipment that will be destroyed.
So great perspectives. I mean, I feel like I've sort of heard how history was made from those days back at Northwestern and Chicago and MIT.
Yeah, thank you.
But it's as current today as it ever was. And if I go back to the P's, there's a common notion today that marketing is being marginalized to the promotion P, and is the default perspective is that it's primarily about communication.
Yeah.
Have you seen that emerge over time? What's your perspective on the fact that that seems to be the dominant thought?
Yes, well, you know, marketing is largely the P of promotion is how people identify marketing. As a matter of fact, some of the other 3 Ps are in the hands of other people in the company. For example, price. If you say that, oh, the marketers set the price, they're very much working with finance and maybe dominated by finance that tells us what the return should be in selling a good. And then just distribution. We're heavily dependent now on supply chain specialists, not marketing specialists, on making sure that there's an arrangement where goods will be available for the level of demand, to meet the level of demand. So in a sense, other disciplines are operating on the 4 Ps as well. And at least we've got promotion. No one else is trying to say there's another group doing the promotion, except the PR people would like to say we underrate their contribution, that PR is, an incidental thing. I think it's more fundamental. If you do, there's a thing I call earned media. And earned media is where you've done some very good things. And if you had some PR around it, could help you build your brand by reporting on those good things that you're doing. So your question has to do with, is marketing only in the public mind about being good at communication? We might even examine that. For example, most companies decide to hire an agency to help do the marketing work. Now, there was a good reason for that, because most companies were small initially. They were family businesses. That's how it all started. And they were good at operations. They made a product and made it well, but they knew nothing about marketing. So you better hire someone who can talk about who you are to other people. And I would say today, many companies can do the better job without an agency. There are certain agency functions that it's better be in the hands of the management of the company. Just buy the services you can't do in the company, but there are some you'll see. How well will the agency know you as a company? Well, they just send a few guys to handle the account and come up with an idea. And yeah, there's some value in that, because they've worked for a lot of other businesses and maybe they picked up some ideas that are good for you too. But I think there's going to be a big question about how much of our promotion do we internalize as opposed to externalize. During the COVID period, the agencies had a very difficult time and promised more than they delivered. So there's a little residual of distrust about what the agency really can do for you. The agency has to promise a lot. That's by the definition of how to get people to pay you, and you don't miss. And then I look at the Super Bowl, and the world all watches that big Super Bowl, and of the 25 commercials that each one cost $30 million a minute or something, I forget the numbers. Lousy commercials. At Northwestern, we particularly have a group that analyzes what were the best commercials and why were some so bad. How does that happen in this age that you have commercials that are so costly that people don't remember even?
It's very, very, very pertinent. And I mean, particularly the debate about in-housing versus outsourcing agency functions is one that is clearly ongoing. And in fact, now in today's context, they even have hybrid models where agencies come and actually sit within the marketing function as a means to try and get closer to the department.
Oh, yes, good point.
Professor, I would just want to maybe turn the page on this a little bit and talk a bit about you and your career. I'm so intrigued. I mean, did you always want to be a marketing academic, or how did that come about? I mean, what were the sort of instrumental moves that took place that led you to where you are?
Yes, no, I don't think marketing was on my mind when I set out. I grew up in a lower middle class setting in a neighborhood where there were a lot of Eastern Europeans who had settled in the United States. And I realized some of them were very poor. It was a mixed neighborhood. And then I would read a lot about very rich people. And what puzzled me at the beginning was how come some people can hardly have enough food and others have so much wealth? So the problem of income distribution was on my mind very early on. And when I came to choose a subject to major in, I thought the answer has to be economics. must be, an answer lies in economics. And then I got into the whole rational man theory, which by now I hope has been discredited, because remember, what modern economics now is redefined as behavioral economics. Behavioral. And you have people writing about nudging, and I developed independently social marketing. Social marketing is not social media marketing. Social media marketing is just the marketing of social media and its use. Social marketing is how we can help people who smoke and want to stop smoking, how we can be helpful with reducing vices that hurt people in their behavior. How do we get people to drive more carefully? How do we prevent people from drowning by being more educated about watching their kids at a beach and not neglecting that? So social marketing is more about correcting commercial marketing. It's so interesting that I suddenly realized that by the way, we're on the 6th edition of the book, Social Marketing. And we also have a new book called 100 Success Stories in Social Marketing. But I realized that commercial marketing's negative impact can be corrected by social marketing, that there's social marketing is a little at war with commercial marketing, but it's still marketing. In other words, some of the people who may be listening now might not want to go into commercial marketing. They may want to go into seeing how can we help people stop using hard drugs and getting into alcoholism and becoming alcoholics and so on. That how can we reverse the marketing mix? I mean, to get people to stop smoking, you always think of the 4 Ps. Raise the price of cigarettes. That makes de-promote smoking, make them be ashamed of being seen smoking. Close down the distribution, make it harder to find the cigarettes when you're looking for them, and things like that. So we can use marketing in reverse to get to demarket a practice, to demarket a way of behaving which is hurting themselves and the society. And we did a good job with cigarettes, I think. I mean, we ended up getting people having to stand outside in cold weather smoking because we don't permit it in the office or on the airplane. So social marketing plays a big role too. But I'm mostly interested in great commercial marketing, and I'm so glad you guys work with Paul Pullman, because he's a hero of mine. I mean, we all have to now balance 2 things: making profits and doing it in a sustainable way. And Paul said in his planning, we're going to move toward net zero emissions. That is, we will conduct ourselves in a way where we don't add carbon to the environment, or we compensate for what we do create as carbon, because it's very important to make profits in the right way. So we have to do more work spreading stories of top companies and others that have been exemplary in the way they think of things. I normally talk about the YKK company in Japan and how the leader, who I know very well, he said, it's not enough for a worker to only get a wage. No wonder they get upset, because the wages, first of all, are never enough. They should be also getting bonuses for good things that they do. And they should buy stock in our company so that they can be a stockholder and a member who cares about what happens to our company. So, in fact, maybe more companies should be employee-owned or cooperatives. Instead of being instruments for making a lot of money for a few people, they should be instruments for growing everyone's wealth. So that's so I got into economics, but I'm more into social science now and thinking of the factors that will improve things.
I also studied economics, and it made me chuckle when you referred to Milton Friedman as Uncle Milty. But you're right; it seems to have been somewhat superseded by behavioral sciences and social sciences. But what's underneath what you've just said, Professor Kotler, is this notion, which I know is true for you, that marketing should be about be a force for good and should build towards better lives. It leads me to a question of perhaps what are you most proud of what you've achieved throughout your illustrious career in terms of being a force for good and creating better lives?
Well, I'm pretty guided by wondering how economic activities and marketing affect people's happiness and health. That's why I'm a member of the World Happiness Foundation. I'm playing around often with whether it's better to, well, it all starts with the idea that GDP, gross domestic product, which is our major measure of progress in our economy, is so totally inadequate as a measure, because GDP grows if you make more cigarettes, if you make more defense equipment, not only if you make good things, but bad things. But the real question is, it's not a matter of just creating more money, but how is the money, what does it do for people's education and health and happiness? Now, I sometimes think it would be better if we add a second measure on well-being, because that's easier to measure than happiness. Gross national well-being. That is, more people are, look, 40% of Americans are obese. That's not a, what's done that is marketing, right? We're so able to place things for them to want to eat and so on that may or may not be very good for them. And so I take in 1967, I said there's a thing called societal marketing. I believe it was there. What does marketing do for society and not for the individual alone? So I stay with that consideration. But here's the thing. You asked the question about my interest and impact. I get a letter from South Korea. It's very interesting. They want to form the Philip Kotler Society. I said, what would they do? Well, they'd read your 80 books and talk about it. I said, well, they're welcome to do that. But then they said, you have to sign a form. Why? It's a group you have to register? Yes, because it will be a group that has to meet, and I think it may be run on a for-profit, not for profit status. So I'd have to sign a form. Now they're saying, they will have 9 meetings a year to talk about my writing, any of my books, and I should be on the air with them for 5 of those 9 meetings. And then at the end, they should all come to the United States as a group and spend a day with me. So it's coming from just a letter. Is it all right if a group talks about your work? I said yes. But now I got to decide whether I'm going to have the time to do that, though I would learn terrifically from South Korea. You know what it reminds me of? I'm almost being treated like Peter Drucker, who's my real hero. When Japan discovered Peter Drucker, it was either before they discovered the quality guy. What's the one who shaped our ideas on getting quality better and better? Deming. Do you remember the name Deming? D-E-M-I-N-G. He taught Americans actually, Japan respected him more than the Americans, but he was teaching quality, better quality, zero defects. So Japan had discovered Drucker, and they idolized him, and they wanted to read all of his books and have him. And you know how they paid him for all of his visits? He didn't want money. He wanted art. They gave him beautiful panels and paintings and so on, in appreciation of the help he's given them in thinking through. And in fact, the Japanese, remember in the 90s, the 80s, in the 1980s, they were taking over automobiles, they were taking over motorcycles, electronics, and so on. And I'll tell you a little story. They said to me, one CEO came up to me and said, "You're killing the United States." This was the CEO. He says, "Your writing or something is killing you. You taught the Japanese quality and how to really make a better car." I said, I haven't been to Japan at that time. What are you talking about? I said, look, I have in my classes always mostly American students, and I have some from Europe, and I always have a few Japanese. Yes, I did notice that the Japanese not only took notes instead of just sitting and listening, but would come up to in my office and ask further questions. So it isn't that I chose to help Japan beat America. It's basically that they had a mindset ready for learning how to beat America. And now guess what? South Korea is beating Japan. Samsung, LG, and their cars, the Kia and the other car. So South Korea, which itself was occupied by the Japanese and became more Japanese than the Japanese, is now. What happened to Sony? The great Sony with its Walkman that was going to own the electronic world. No, South Korea, in coming to me, obviously think that some of the things I've said is their formula for moving ahead. So wow. I'll probably say, go ahead with that society. That's fine.
Professor, thank you for that. I mean, it's amazing when you think about, how mindset and a learning culture really kind of takes to the forefront here. I think we're out of time on this, so it's only for me to say what an amazing session this has been, and what an absolute honor and privilege it is to meet you, to connect with you, and to hear your perspectives. So thank you from me. I'm going to hand over to Mark now for some of our closing reflections.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ritchie. What an absolute privilege. I'm going to do my best to condense, 60 or 70 years into a few minutes. But as Ritchie said at the outset, it's been a true blessing to have one of the greatest thinkers of our time, and indeed the father of modern marketing. And all the 80 books, including the ones from 1967, which are maybe better as keepers' items than as practical guides. But anyway, we started out hearing about the reason for the 22 honorary degrees is that the world was looking for answers. And you wanted marketing to be a force for good, and recognizing that marketing is actually everywhere and everything. Absolutely fascinating to hear about the origination of the P's, and that it might have been 3 P's and 1 D. Who knew? But for the intervention there. And then, of course, your schooling, your grounding, your academic basis through Uncle Milty, through John Maynard Keynes, through Nobel Prize winners. But of course, in the end, decisions aren't made rationally. As you say, that would be a joke. Buying is emotional. So as much as anything, you've branched out into sociology, anthropology. I mean, it really characterizes, you are the epitome of a lifelong learner. We also heard about there's a better way for capitalism, not least in the Nordic countries, and the rich poor, who knew? So good to learn about that. In terms of marketing's role in the mix of things, yes, characterized for promotion, around promotion P, but recognize also the interdependencies. So I think there's a different perspective around not being marginalized, but needing to seek interdependency. Super Bowl advertising is lousy. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a mixed bag there. You didn't set out to be in marketing. That's perhaps the most interesting thing you've said along the way. And indeed, you haven't stayed in marketing as you've moved into behavioral economics and social marketing. You are a force for good in your own right. I love the fact that you're involved with the World Happiness Foundation and the work that they're doing. Wouldn't it be great if we had a GDW metric, gross domestic well-being? And I also love the fact that Peter Drucker is your hero, as he is for many as well. So it's been a masterclass in the evolution of marketing as a practice, hearing some of the stories of its foundations and just getting your perspectives on the world. So thank you again for your time today. It's been brilliant.
Thank you for inviting me and for your wonderful summary of what I said. I learned a lot about myself in hearing you put it that way. And keep up this program. Please keep inviting the more than the 118 people who've already spoke. There's so many gems in our profession who have things to say, things more connected maybe with the practice of marketing. We didn't get to that enough, and that's my fault. So you could be a very important force, and I hope not only, I think your audience is worldwide, or should be. I mean, and I will tell people in the US more about your programming. If you have something to send me that could be advertising of the work you're doing or descriptive of the work you're doing, I think that should be mentioned certainly in LinkedIn and maybe even in other ways. All right, enough. Thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you, Professor.